Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Stand Up. I hope you heard the last two episodes because the opening are evergreen this week, meaning it's always going to be relevant. Susie Havemann, the great Susie Havemann, emailed me yesterday and said when you listen to the show a couple days after it's posted, the news headlines are kind of irrelevant. And so I really like what you're experimenting with, getting a lot of great feedback from folks. So thank you very much for your email, Susie, and everybody else's feedback. We're being positive and inspiring. We're talking about coping mechanisms and resources and thought experiments and philosophy and comedy. That's right. Always going to try to have as much humor in the conversation as possible. So thank you very much for pressing play. I've got Barry Ritholtz joining me today, and then I've got a conversation with radio and podcast YouTuber Brian Shapiro, who invited me on his very popular show out of Las Vegas and huge now on YouTube as well. And so I brought you that interview. I was his guest, and so I rolled on it. So you can hear that after my conversation with Ritholtz, which starts at 16 minutes. And my guest appearance on Brian Shapiro's show begins at 1 hour, 2 minutes. But right now, I'm going to give you some more of that good stuff. That's right. If you press play on Stand Up with Pete Dominick this week and maybe ongoing, continuing forward, you're going to hear good stuff. Things that make you feel good, make you think. Or as my friend Susie wrote, so glad I tuned in today. It's like having an on-demand access to a comforting blanket or an old and true friend or an ability to channel in an inner peace. That's what it's like listening to your show. Thank you, Susie. You are the best. All right. So first of all, I want to share with you this clip from Jessica Williams on The Daily Show. I got two clips from The Daily Show. Jon Stewart coming up, but I thought this was really good and helpful and very important, this commentary from her on The Daily Show.
I know you're exhausted. Hell, I'm exhausted. Everybody's exhausted. Anger and disappointment in our political discourse is exhausting. But it's easy to throw up our hands and be like, fine, it, I'm tired. Go ahead and take people's rights. I'm just going to plow through a case of Trulies and binge 52 episodes of Love Island. Oh, you want to know what those are? Truly's a hard seltzer and Love Island is like Gilligan's Island with
Oh! What channel is that on?
Hey, now, focus, okay? I just want to be clear, all right? Do not let them exhaust you. Don't let the constant draining bullshit wear you out. Do not turn away. Look it right down that barrel and say, not today, apathy. I'm only having half a case of Trulies. And no matter what happens, we have to throw our arms around the people who need us the most and hang the on.
Yes, I thought that was so good. In case it matters to you, she's a black woman saying that. And so I love that. That went viral, as you can imagine. And then this is Jon Stewart yesterday. I love this about 4-minute commentary from him. I think he nails it here though I don't think I need to set it up anymore than here he is.
Everyone's talking about this wokeness theory, from cable news to the op-ed section. And sometimes the op-ed section being read on cable news.
We want to get to the Maureen Dowd piece. Maureen Dowd's piece for the New York Times entitled Democrats and the Case of Mistaken Identity Politics.
Ooh! That was Morning Joe host Mika Brzezinski discussing a New York Times column by Maureen Dowd on how to escape the liberal bubble. I guess I'll just have to get the Times and read it myself unless there's another way to make this less entertaining.
We're going to read the entire piece, but it's worth it.
About wokeness? I couldn't even stay woke through that whole thing. Why don't you read us the Wordle?
Stupid.
I only have one problem with the woke theory. I just didn't recall seeing any Democrats running on woke shit. These were the commercials I saw for the Democrats.
Sherrod Brown is working to fix our border crisis.
Mondaire Jones is working to secure our border.
Pat Ryan is restoring order at our southern border.
I'm Laura Gillen, and I'm here at the border of Nassau County. We're 2,000 miles from Mexico, but we're feeling the migrant crisis almost every day.
In Nassau County, by the way, Suffolk County, make my day. You want a piece of our strip malls? You're going to have to go through Laura Gillen. Those are the Democrats. The Democrats. I gave the police more money than they even wanted. I gave them planes and tanks. I built a moat around the country and filled it with alligators and chlamydia. They didn't talk about pronouns. They didn't say Latin X. It was the opposite.
We can't let China steal Wisconsin jobs.
Benefits for illegal immigrants? No way. Blocking support for white farmers? I mean, look at me.
Standing with law enforcement against defunding the police.
I've owned a gun my whole life.
Let me be clear. I don't want boys playing girls' sports.
You all know me. I've never pushed for sex changes.
Oh, it's good. Wow.
Well, that's just a weird one at the end there. Come on, guys, you know me. He's like George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life. I'm not the guy who pushes sex. I'm in your shops every day. Mary, it's me, George Bailey. I'm not trying to get you to get a sex change. I'm just wishing I was dead.
Wishing I was dead.
And don't forget about Kamala Harris. It's not like she was exactly waving around her NPR tote bag.
I have a Glock.
It's very good.
They didn't do the woke thing. They tried. They acted like Republicans for the last 4 months. They wore camo hats.
Exactly. It's such a good argument. I mean, it's selective what John is doing here, but find me anybody talking about defunding the police or all this wokeness that they talk about. I mean, I just think, and I'm not buying those arguments, so I thought that was really good. Just another minute of it from John.
And went to Cheney family reunions.
Exactly.
Do you know how dangerous it is to wear a hunting hat around Cheney? Give me the idea.
So good. Exactly. So that's the point.
Thought I had one more rip in me. I didn't.
He's ripping his notes up.
Democrats were mostly running against an identity that was defined for them.
Yes, it was defined for them. That is so well said. They're constantly telling us who we are, and they get away with it, and then they echo it over and over.
Based on a couple of months of post-George Floyd defund the police, Me Too Instagram posts from 4 years ago.
Right.
What happened was the country felt like government wasn't working for them. And the Democrats in particular were taking their hard-earned money and giving it to people who didn't deserve it as much as them.
Right.
And so the Democrats got shellacked. I'm sure any robust examination of better policies is very welcome. But I just want to please assure people, this isn't forever.
Right.
This is the map in 1984 when Ronald Reagan won. That's the map. The only state the Democrats won was Minnesota. Yeah. Everyone thought that's the end of the Democrats. But 8 years later, there was a Democrat back in office.
That's right.
We don't know what's going to happen in 4 years at all. The only thing that is certain is this.
You all know me. I've never pushed for sex changes.
There you go, Jon Stewart and The Daily Show. That's last night, I think. I thought that was really very good. And now I want to add another audio clip, which I think is really great. This is thank you to Tina Winsett. Thank you to everybody who's helping me produce this segment. And this is Tim Walz's daughter making a video that she posted, I think, to whatever, I don't know, Instagram or something, TikTok. Her name is Hope Walz. And I just thought this was very human and wonderful. I liked it.
Okay, I'm sitting here on my couch eating SpongeBob mac and cheese and watching Outer Banks, and I just have a couple initial post-election thoughts. I've officially reached a point of anger, and I'm not an angry person, so I'm just trying to channel it. The first one being, this country does not deserve Kamala Harris. That woman should go live her best life wherever she wants, doing whatever she wants, because we don't deserve her at this point. The only people that delivered this election were Black women, and we failed them. And it's just heartbreaking, and we've got to do whatever we can to support them and support our people through these next 4 years. Another one is these people have to live in their own skin, as in J.D. Vance and Donald Trump have to be J.D. Vance and Donald Trump. And that is not a punishment I would wish upon anybody except those two individuals. Yeah, so I'm just really grateful that I am who I am and that I'm on the side of love and hope and joy and progress. Yeah, that's what I've got so far. I definitely am going to have more thoughts as time goes on, and I think I'm going to share them on here. I think it's a good outlet. But yeah, I'm giving myself the week to be sad and to mourn what could have been, what should have been. But that's not where we are, and that's not reality. And I'm giving myself the week to accept that and to be in it, and then the work starts. So we got this, America. We're going to be okay.
If you say so, Hope Walls, I believe you, or at least I want to be. And I always believe Dr. Tara Brach. I like her. She is a psychologist, author of several books, and kind of a spiritual teacher. She's one of these type of voices, these calming voices, but she's filled with wisdom. And I've loved her work around what she refers to as radical acceptance, radical compassion. And she's a meditator, of course, but I think she's got a great 1-minute message here for the times that we're now in. And I thought I would share it with you. And I think it'll be that warm blanket that Susie referred to, just her voice alone. Listen to Tara Brach, always.
If we pause, we can find out how the stress of our current times can grow our heart space, our strength, our flexibility, our connectedness, our capacity to love. You may well have experienced this in your own lives with times of real upheaval, pain, loss. It might have been losing a job or in a relationship, someone dear that dies, a cancer that really threatens your life. And what we find sometimes is these great unwanted changes actually leave us more deeply awake. We emerge spiritually stronger, more tender-hearted, more present.
Yeah, will we come out better as a result of the adversity and challenges that we have to overcome individually or as a community, as a country? I think Tara Brach has a lot of wisdom around that and so much more. I highly recommend her work. You'll be hearing me play probably more of her clips as well. Who else should I play? What else should I play? Send me clips, standupwithpete@gmail.com, and send me quotes too. A lot of good quotes being sent my way, and I'm very, very thankful. Got this from Paul Wesley, who says, "Love will always win in the end, Pete," and sent me this quote. "People are often unreasonable, illogical, and self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you're kind, people may accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Be kind anyway. If you're successful, you'll win some false friends and some true enemies. Succeed anyway. If you're honest and frank, people may cheat you. Be honest and frank anyway. What you spend years building, someone could destroy overnight. Build anyway. If you find serenity and happiness, they may be jealous. Be happy anyway. The good you do today, people will often forget tomorrow. Do good anyway. Give the world the best you have, and it may never be enough. Give your best anyway. You see, in the final analysis, it is between you and your God. It was never between you and them anyway." That's Mother Teresa, hence the God comment. But, you can change that to anything that matters to you that you would measure as integrity. So in the final analysis, it's between you and your own moral values, the way that you want to be. Same thing. I love that. Thank you, Paul Wesley, for sending that. I really appreciated it, and it was moving. I hope other people feel the same way. And finally, paraphrasing spiritual teacher Ram Dass, "Whether this is the first day of the apocalypse or the first day of the golden age, the work remains the same, to love each other and ease as much suffering as possible. And you know what? I might adopt that as a mantra for our community, the stand-up community. That's exactly what we do for each other. Love each other and ease as much suffering as possible. Thank you, Ram Dass, and thank you for everybody who sent me these quotes and comments and emails. Send it all to standupwithpete@gmail.com. Okay. Now let's get to my first guest. How's that? How does that sound for an opening? 15 minutes of goodness, right? You like it? We got some laughs. We got some thoughts. The warm blanket section of the show. And if you don't want to hear the serious stuff that's difficult, then, maybe now is the time to punch out. I hear you. Take care of yourself. Go do good things with your hands, as Vicky's mother says. We heard her on yesterday's show. If you didn't hear that, go back and listen. But now it's time to get to Barry Ritholtz, who, of course, is the author of Bailout Nation. He's the president, CEO of Ritholtz Wealth Management. You can check out his always interesting blog, The Big Picture. Find him on social media, and he hosts a great podcast and radio show on Bloomberg Network. It's called Masters in Business. After that, my appearance on Brian Shapiro's show. But right now, it's time to get to Big Barry Ritholtz. There he is. Been way too long, but you are certainly one of the people I want to talk about the future of our financial security, our economy under fascism.
Hey now.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Interesting week, to say the very least.
So I have a lot of questions for you, but I remember talking to you shortly after Trump was elected the first time, and you really talked me off the ledge in terms of what would happen to the economy. You had no question about things like, would he do a Muslim ban? Would he separate kids? You knew he would do vile things to marginalized communities. But in terms of the economy, you didn't think he would crash it or something. What do you think?
It's hard. It's really hard. It's really hard to crash the economy. If anybody can do it, he can. But it's even a big lift for him.
How did your predictions about how his economy would work out, including COVID, how did they shake out? Do you think that he thought it would be about what you thought it would be in terms of the interests and who was really making economic impact?
So I got some stuff right. I got some stuff wrong. The things I got right were were my expertise, the markets, the economy, the overall way things operated. That I got right. When I engaged in what is technically called epistemic trespass, I love that phrase. It's a chapter in my new upcoming book. Epistemic trespass is when someone who has a skill set or expertise in one area tries to reach outside of that area and imply that their abilities with very mixed results. So he did some stuff that as a rational human being, I couldn't imagine anybody doing. I didn't understand how the Muslim ban could possibly stand up. And for the most part, it didn't exactly.
That's an issue about courts and laws and stuff. But in terms of
and to a large degree, the courts were a bulwark against his worst impulses. But on the other hand, things like the child separation policy and putting kids at the border in cages and that sort of stuff, I lacked the imagination to even consider that anyone would engage in such reprehensible.
Yeah, but you did say, we talked. We talked about that, and you basically said, listen, I can't predict how bad it'll get for marginalized, vulnerable communities.
That's absolutely true.
And you're saying now it got worse in many ways than I thought. And we could argue certain things didn't happen and so on. But now, so when you look, though, just sticking with that question and the economic impacts, what happened?
The worst case scenario is bad. So here's what's interesting. Are we really going to put a 60% tariff on China and make everybody pay much higher?
I don't think so.
Or is that a negotiating tactic and it's in order to get certain fair things out of China? We'll find out. The worst case scenario is we have a persistent structural inflation rate of 10% versus that brief kiss to 9% and back. So that's one issue. What's going to happen with foreign policy? Is he going to abandon NATO? Does NATO fall apart? Does he essentially give Ukraine to the Russians? Do we stop supplying them with arms? If China sees Russia just taking what it wants, does China take Taiwan with the massive consequences for Taiwan Semiconductor and the rest of the global economy? If he does a number of really inadvised things, he can cause major economic turmoil, but he really has to work at it. To me, the biggest risk is obviously tariffs are a risk. Big fat tax cuts are going to make the deficit worse. I've said this repeatedly over the years. You will notice the deficit hawks are very partisan in nature, and when their guys in the office, they're okay with deficits. When their guys out of the office, they're the worst thing in the world. Right. You should expect deficits to go up substantially. In my lifetime, deficits hasn't caused any problems, but at a certain point in the future, deficits are going to be problematic. We have a burgeoning climate change sector that's doing really well. Everything from EVs to solar panels to, although we have ceded a lot of that to China. China is the giant lead in batteries and the giant lead in solar panels, and he can mess that up. He can change the tax.
Yeah, maybe we harness the newer battery technology better than they do, but yeah.
Your grandkids are going to live in a very different world than you live in. Or we come up with some way to see the upper atmosphere reflect some light from the sun and stop global warming. Maybe there's a technological solution, and the worst expectations are out there, but I'm even now at the point where I'm reusing plastic bottles because I shouldn't even be buying them in the first place, but since I'm in the house, I find.
Oh, you know what? I gotta stop you there and say, welcome to me in 1999, you prick. So you've talked about.
It's a problem.
You've talked about foreign policy. You've talked about foreign policy. You've talked about deficit. You've talked about tariffs just a little bit. And now you're talking about climate and technology around that and so on. But let me just walk back because those are broad strokes and those are important. I'm sure there's a few more. What I'm really interested in is right now the contours I'm seeing and hearing are that if Trump does nothing in terms of economics, he's going to inherit a really good situation because of the investments that were made by Biden and Democrats, as are Republican districts and states all over. And why would he want to spoil if the economy is going really well with things like tariffs or even, I always argue, deportations of millions of people would be, I think, really bad for the economy. Why does he want to do things that would be bad for the economy, especially if billionaires are the most influential people in his ear?
So that's a really more nuanced and complex question that really needs to be unpacked. First, yesterday, I want to read a text I sent to you at 9:58 a.m. Trump has inherited two of the best post-crash economies in history. 2016, he came in 2017 after the worst of the great financial crisis was behind us. And now, after the post-COVID inflation surge has ended, he is one lucky son of a bitch. And that end text. And that is really true. Stop and think about, to some degree, George Bush Sr. was unlucky. Bill Clinton was lucky. Bush came in after a long run of economic expansion and the first little wobbles in 88 and 90, and that hurt him. Clinton came in 92 and had 8 great years. He left. George Bush Sr. comes in right in the dot-com implosion, and pretty soon after wasn't paying attention to the warnings about 9/11, and then that happened, and then decided to make himself a wartime president, and so we had a really weird kind of situation. So he's really lucky. He came in 2017, a fantastic, the Obama economy was on fire, and now the Biden economy is on fire. Somebody wrote a piece, let me find this, that basically said along these lines, Michael Tomasky, it wasn't the economy, it wasn't inflation or anything else. It was how people perceive those things, which points to one overpowering answer. And that's the fascinating thing. You know, there was a whole lot of professional malpractice that took place. Not just the pollsters, who were once again terrible, not just the media. Were they terrible?
I'm sorry, I thought the polls were somewhat accurate.
Razor thin margin. It's too close to tell. This is going to come down. This is going to go for days. No, this was a giant thumping 51%. This is the first president since 2004, first GOP president to win an actual majority and the Electoral College. Even though a lot of state resolutions went the other way, this was a rejection of Kamala. This was a rejection of Democrats in general. I don't believe it's just about inflation, but that clearly was a big factor. And this was a thumping. The pollsters were wrong. It's all going to come down to Pennsylvania. No, it was Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina, Nevada, Arizona. He swept every swing state.
But I thought, I'm not arguing with any of that. My understanding was that the polls were very close in all those states. This was always, as you taught me years ago, not an unlikely statistical possibility, this outcome, because it was a razor thin margin in all those states. And while it went his way and all of them, they got it wrong. They did get it within the margin of error. No,
they missed a lot of this by the margin of error. And what I wrote on Tuesday, who's going to win, I laid out 4 scenarios. And what I wrote the week before, I wrote a piece, where might consensus be wrong? And where the consensus is going to be wrong is the polls, their poor track record. There's a concept called
you had him winning
bias.
Twice and her winning twice.
Right. No, I said, is it razor thin hers? Is it razor thin his? Does it break to her? Does it break to him? And that Iowa poll, she's up 3. She's down 10 in Iowa. Come on. And wherever else you looked, she wildly underperformed Biden. Not by a little, but by a whole lot. And that wasn't, so the polls were not great. And then the media narratives were even worse. The media narratives were, it's razor thin. This is going to be a turnout election. 2024 is going to be the year of the woman voter. None of that really turned out to be true. Endorsements didn't make a difference. I don't think clearly the Biden debate made a difference, because after the Biden debate, he was able to tap out. Yeah. He was forced out by Pelosi and others.
Just quickly, just want to give you my quick take.
Sure.
Because I feel like the data is not out yet. Exit polling is not the data that we get in a few weeks with Pew Research. And you have hard data that's connected to people's names, their gender, their race, and their vote. So we'll know a lot more about that. But my hot take was, and it simply is, and I know there's not a lot of nuance here, but he was always going to win regardless of who ran as a Democrat and what kind of campaign strategy, policies, substance, style. He was always
maybe at the time it was hard to tell. The really interesting thing to me, the most interesting thing. Let me find this.
I got thrown by the appearance of the energy and momentum that she had at rallies at the DNC.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
And the unity of the Democratic movement, progressive movement for her as the candidate. There were almost no outliers in terms of serious people calling for a convention. We were pro.
Check out these numbers, which are mind-blowing. In 2020, Biden had 81.3 million votes. Trump had 74. In this election, 74.2 million. He had 71 million votes in this election. He did worse than in 2020. Harris, on the other hand, did 15 million votes less than Biden. She had 66. He beat her by almost 5 million votes. And I don't know, it makes you wonder, did Biden have an off night? He certainly looked pretty vivacious lately. He's old, Trump is old. But God, this was a bloodbath. And you said something, I got to share Chris Venn in my office, my partner Chris.
Yeah, of course.
Chris said something that was really insightful. And I know he was disappointed by the outcome of the election. And he said, I suppose there were more people who thought like I do and who were like me than there really was. Yeah. And I thought that was really insightful. The fact that, hey, you know what? Not for nothing, Chris, but you're highly educated. You make a nice living. You live in a nice part of the world, a nice part of the state, a nice part of, you're 10 minutes from the ocean in a beautiful house in a nice neighborhood. And I don't know if that puts you in the top.
I think the thing that you don't realize is, because you're not like Chris. I know Chris well, and Chris, for listeners, has my sensibilities, my sensitivities, my thoughtfulness, unlike you.
I'm a bull in a china shop. I'm completely oblivious.
Compared to Chris and I, you're more of a prick. I can't speak for Chris, but my point is
a prick. He is more of a people person than I am.
Whatever. He thinks people are more likely.
I don't care for the humans.
he thinks people are more, I know that's the problem. He thinks people are more likely do care for humans and are good people. You're more of a dog person.
Right.
And
I'm more realistic. I know people suck. And, so when people engage, like, I'm disappointed that 51% of my fellow Americans looked at him with all of his baggage and said, yeah, that's my guy. But I'm not surprised. Chris was disappointed and surprised. That's the difference between us. Maybe it's a little age. Maybe it's just that, no, I know people. I've met people. They suck. And that's the difference between Chris and I. It's just, but his point is really valid. Hey, I'm financially secure. He's financially secure. He's not dealing with meth in his backyard. He's not dealing with his entire industry going away. Although give AI a couple of years, who knows what happens? So we're different than a lot of these people. And it's very, in all seriousness, not joking, it's very hard to imagine what it's like in parts of the country, especially the Southeast, especially the Appalachians, especially.
You're talking all about white people, and that's fine. Because poor black people.
Yes, okay, fine. That's I wasn't intentionally referring to that. I'm trying to reach outside of my geographic region.
No, but I'm saying that obviously, I think the point that I'm trying to make and haven't made well is that what Chris and I believe is that we think that people look at Donald Trump and think he's a monster. And even though maybe things might be a little better under him for this reason or that, I could never bring myself to vote for him because of what he'll do to my friends and so on. So like black folks, obviously, and most working class, non-white working class folks saw how terrible of a man he was, and it started and ended there. Like, the guy's a rapist.
And yet that didn't. He won Dade County. He won Miami.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think inflation.
He had a big
incumbents all over the
impact
world
on Hispanic voters.
Inflation is killing incumbents all over the world, and so there stands to reason that. But I still obviously think that her being a woman and black, all these analysis right now, I'm still not agreeing with much more than what is seemingly obvious. It's not that she didn't reach out to this constituency or that she worked with Liz Cheney or several other things that are being given. I'm not seeing any convincing argument. I certainly am open to changing my mind for sure when I see the data.
All right, so I forgot the name.
If you have data, and I want it.
No, a lot of this is very squishy.
Right now, it will shape up, and so let's get back to not so much politics and the mathematics of the outcomes and what we got wrong, but to what you think. What are you hearing? What advice are you giving to investors about what's going to happen in the markets and in our 401ks under Trump too?
The same as it always. You know, he would really have to go out of his way to screw this. Like, even Trump is going to be hard-pressed to mess up this economy. The economy is robust. Unemployment is 4%. Inflation has come way down. We have a shortage of workers. We have a shortage of houses. All of the Biden legislation has been a giant wind at the back of the economy. The CHIPS Act, I don't know if he wants to overturn that. Kind of what he did last time when he came in was try and undo everything Obama did. What's fascinating are all the people who vote against their own interest. And I don't mean just this election. When you look at the Mississippi and Alabama, why don't they have Obamacare there? Why do they keep electing people who won't give them basic health care provisions? It's amazing to see that.
Dying of Whiteness. Jonathan Metzl's book, Dying of Whiteness, documents that, what you're saying. But
it's amazing. Jonathan Last had this brutal, hey, we can't help people who aren't going to help themselves. And look what the Democrats did in Arizona. They helped the Republicans after the Republican Supreme Court reinstated this draconian 1864 law. Why would you help them overturn that? Leave that as an albatross on their neck and vote them out you didn't have to do that this summer. You could vote them out in November. And it's amazing to see all these different things. So I don't know. I think the Democrats have to become more like the Republicans in terms of being politically savvy and being politically savage, because what they're doing hasn't been working.
Yeah, I don't agree, because I don't think Democrats can replicate any of what Republicans do effectively. It would not work with.
They don't have the same media infrastructure. There was a bunch of surveys that said, ask people questions about the economy, about foreign policy, about the stock market, about whatever. And the wronger they are in answering the questions, the more likely they are to be a Trump supporter. And so you have misinformation and, hey, maybe $44 billion was a worthwhile expenditure by Elon Musk because it's going to get him trillions of dollars in federal largesse because of he would help spread a lot of we love and low information voters, Trump said once. No, you're not supposed to say the quiet part out loud, but he did. And misinformation is so I'm on the way into the city on Wednesday to record a podcast at Bloomberg. And I'm just waiting to change trains at Jamaica. And this woman in a Homeland Security's windbreaker comes up to me. Hey, where do I find the Grand Central train? I go, follow me. It'll be on this track in 9 minutes. She's like, great. And then she just starts chatting me up about the election and this and that. And at that point, it was Wednesday and we had known who won. Another thing the media got wrong and the consensus got wrong. We knew 2 a.m. So what do you think of the election? She says, I'm thrilled that it was resolved, that it didn't require any violence. It's all good. And then she said this thing to me that kind of blew my mind. She said, I'm really glad Trump won. I have 3 daughters. And I'm like, so let me ask you a question. You have 3 daughters. Aren't you concerned about their ability to get health care? Women are dying in emergency rooms in Texas and Florida.
Immigrants.
And she's, yeah, but that doesn't matter. I live in New York. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then here's what blew my mind. She said, and besides, I really am very unhappy about Democrats murdering babies after they're born. And I know this is a right-wing meme put out by the Virginia governor that has gone all over the place.
Trump himself has said that over and over. Yeah.
Over and over. So I said to her, I go, ma'am, can I ask you a personal question? And she says, yes. I go, do you watch a lot of Fox News? And she goes, it's the only thing on in our house. I say, okay, I'm not going to correct you because you don't know who I am, and why would you believe me? But you work for Homeland Security. You work in law enforcement. Do you work with prosecutors? Yes. Do you work with judges? Yes. Do you work with a lot of attorneys? Yes. Do yourself a favor and ask any one of them, hey, is it considered the crime of homicide in all 50 states to murder a baby after they're born? Just ask them that. And then rethink where you're getting your information
from. That is hilarious.
Swear that's true.
Wow, yeah, but that's not an argument most people can access because the person worked in law enforcement. But
I mean, you could say the same thing. Don't believe. So when you tell people, the boomerang effect is they just double down on whatever.
All right, hold on.
This is the Thanksgiving piece I wrote a couple of years ago. How to get along with people at Thanksgiving. Don't correct them. It's pointless. Make them go find it themselves.
That's a much better point. Don't make them find ways to go prove their argument. It's also a less, as you were taking, obviously, with this person who's a stranger, a female, and law enforcement, you're being aggressive. You are being thoughtful, and you don't need to be aggressive with people. Sometimes you can just ask them why they think what they think and go ask this question and get back to me, and you're uniquely, obviously, great at that. But
that's because Robert Heinlein taught me the most important thing that you should know when it comes to debating people about politics, about religion, about everything, which is simply this. Never try and teach a pig to sing. It wastes your time and annoys the pig. That line is just brilliant because you're not going to – a stranger is not going to – oh, you've changed my mind, said no one ever on Twitter.
Here's the difference, though. Let me see if I can split that hair real quickly because maybe I'm doing something wrong. That I certainly agree with, and that's a brilliant statement. But I think he was referring – I think you're referring to talking to someone on the subway platform, talking to more importantly, talking to somebody you care about at Thanksgiving or in your family. I'm talking – is there an exception to that rule when you and I are arguing on the podcast – not that I'm going to convince you, but listeners hear both sides of the argument. I'm arguing with someone on CNN. Not that I'm convincing him, but a viewer hears the point I'm making.
That's a public forum. It's very different.
So that argument does not apply to a public forum because it's a public forum, and so therefore a debate and discussion and critical thinking presented by several different viewpoints is probably going to lead to the best conclusion in that case.
So for the few hundred people that appear regularly on TV – no, try and teach the pig to sing. For the 99.9993674% of humanity that's not debating these issues on TV, don't try and teach the pig to sing. You're much. By the way, Robert Cialdini's book Persuasion and all of his subsequent research and writing, says if you want to persuade people, there's a process. When he was a grad student, he worked purposefully. He embedded himself in insurance offices, in used cars offices, in stockbrokers. I wonder all these places that engaged in sales and tried to figure out how they were so effective persuading people. And that became he's a social psychologist. That became his professional research. Persuasion, I think, has sold like 5 million copies. But there are lots of techniques you can do if you want to put the time and effort in to persuading people. Like one of his favorite things to say is when you're canvassing door to door, hey, I used to think just like you. In fact, I'm very similar to you. We're the same age, the same sort of work. We have similar age kids. But when I was laid off from work and lost my health care insurance, and then suddenly my daughter needed an operation and we couldn't afford it, it changed my view on Obamacare. How would you feel if you were just laid off for 6 months and you didn't have health care?
No, I think
that's there's like many techniques that are effective. And this book has been out for decades, but that's one example. Another example is the research is you tell people they're wrong. Their sense of self-identity is built into this whole model of who they are, what their values are, who they associate with. No one is just going to turn on a dime and say, oh, you fact-checked what I said, now I'm going to rethink my entire belief system. That just doesn't happen. But if they find the evidence on their own, it's possible that they will slowly integrate that into what they know. And when they hit a critical mass of things that conflict with their basic underlying philosophy, then they start to rethink that ideology.
You were always rethinking your ideology. Your new piece at The Big Picture, 10 investing lessons from the 2024 election. This is post-election. You wrote this, obviously, and people should go.
Thursday. I wrote it Wednesday night and posted it Thursday.
Let me tick through them. They're not all obvious.
Sure.
And then I'll go back, ask you to go. Investing and politics don't mix. Forecasts, LOL. Predictive polling fails. Narratives dominate. That one I don't necessarily know what you mean. Your filter bubble, okay. Sentiment is hard to measure. Interesting. Media coverage is misfocused. Most interesting. Your attention is misplaced. Don't know what that means. Speculation is rampant, okay. Nobody knows anything. Love it. Humility is in short supply. Don't think we need any more evidence of it. So, going back. The ones that aren't as obvious, I want to get your attention.
Sure.
Your attention is misplaced.
Yeah, so look at, and a lot of this one follows media coverage is misfocused because it's naturally. So what did we spend a lot of time talking about? The vice presidential candidates, the debates, Trump's legal problems, climate change, transgender rights. You look at the early exit polls, none of those things mattered, at least not in big numbers. What did matter? Inflation, the economy, abortion rights, and immigration. But inflation and the economy trumped abortion and everything else. And so the problem, and by the way, this was George Bush Sr.'s problem. When the election in November 92 happened, the recession was over for 6 months, but it takes a while for people to recognize where we are economically. Inflation peaked in June 2022. A year ago, it was lower. But now everything is more expensive, even though inflation is a measure of the rate of change. Prices are what you pay today. So even if inflation were zero today, it wouldn't matter because we had a 30% bump. Right. Now, a lot of this, the ironic thing is much of the things that people are complaining about today were driven in part during the Trump administration. So the first two CARES Act were 75% of that spending. That's what drove the surge of inflation. I had Jeremy Siegel of Wharton on, who when the first CARES Act was passed, so almost $2 trillion, it was 10% of GDP. It was the biggest fiscal stimulus since World War II. He said this is going to cause a giant surge of inflation. Nobody believed him. And he was dead right. I think, so if I were advising the Biden administration, I would have said to them, hey, you have to start blaming a lot of stuff on Trump before 2024. It's starting in 2021. So what he should have said, my predecessor passed a massive fiscal stimulus, which we know is going to be inflationary. But you know what? He had no choice, because if he didn't pass the CARES Act, unemployment would have spiked to 10 or 15%. Larry Summers said it's going to take 5 years at 10% to get inflation down. That he was wrong. So really, that's not relevant there. But he could have said, your choice is either high unemployment or high inflation. And the Congress and Trump chose high inflation. And I have to be honest, I agree with that. We had a deadly pandemic. Everyone was stuck at home. We had to give them money to pay their rent, to feed their kids. We knew it was going to be inflationary. It passed 496 to 4. So everybody is responsible, but we'll deal with it the best we can. We'll pass an Inflation Reduction Act. So that's number one. Hey, the Afghanistan pullout was on Trump's timeline, and they should have said from the beginning, we're inheriting a disaster from Trump, and I don't know if there's anything we can do about it. Again, a little hindsight. I have the advantage of that. But the inflation thing was obvious. I wrote a piece a couple of years ago. Which would you prefer? High temporary inflation or high temporary unemployment is incredibly wrenching, especially in a country without
No, I mean, I would
healthcare.
rather have health insurance than pay more for my food. Like, I need health care. I need that's an easy question. The other, by the way, the media one thing I would add to the media narrative, or what the media focused on. You mentioned a couple of the things. They focused a lot on the threat that Trump was to democracy, and I think what we're learning.
I didn't see as much in print. Yes, television. No.
I saw
television was all about the horse race. They were all about, and that's why they focus on polls so much.
No, I disagree. MSNBC was covered in blocks and hours dedicated to democracy. CNN less, but certainly it was. And the point I'm making, even if you disagree, I'm feeling like what I learned in the last few weeks, and I think I already kind of knew it, is a lot of Americans, including a veteran. I was at an event with a veteran, talked about fighting for America, don't know what democracy means. This veteran who fought in
Was he
Iraq,
a sucker or a loser, the veteran you were talking about?
well,
Which
don't
was
get me
he?
started. That's what I got in trouble for on CNN last night again.
What?
It was a fight about, they tried to make the point that people were mad at Joe Biden because of the Afghans pull out, and that somehow Trump was better for veterans. And I was like, he hates veterans. And then it got all
right.
So
they're suckers and losers. That's what he said. Why would anyone join the military? They're suckers and losers. Full stop. If you're a veteran and you voted for Trump, I gotta ask you, are you aware of how he feels about you?
But we're not solving that right now. My larger point is this question about the focus on democracy. And my point is, what I'm learning is that Americans have no idea what that means, and they certainly don't know what life without it looks like. They're not reading authoritarian history the way that many of us are. And so they just didn't, it wasn't a concern of theirs, and it never is, because the experts say it happens fast. You're not predicting to lose a whole bunch of rights and access and free speech and everything, and it just happens. And they don't know about that.
I guess.
So why talk about it? It doesn't rate. It doesn't make an impact. We thought it was a really important thing to talk about, but maybe we overestimated people's concern of it.
There's an element of that. I also think a lot of people don't think in terms of big philosophical theories like democracy. I just don't see that as the focus. The focus is on what does it cost? Can't believe how much people talked about the cost of McDonald's. And it's one thing to say, it's one thing to talk about inflation generally, but Sam Criss, by the way, is a guy who had this really interesting piece explaining his view back in June is, Kamala Harris got shellacked in 2020. She's not a great candidate. She hasn't accomplished a lot as a vice president, and we should go through a normal primary process. And if you can't, she's going to get shellacked. And maybe he was lucky, but go reread that piece he wrote, and it's pretty brutal. And the fact that he wrote it 6 months ago is interesting, or whatever it was, 3 months ago. But in the meantime, we're stuck in a place where it's still the economy, stupid, and the way the media covers so much stuff, and how much misinformation is out there, it's a big impact. And so we have lots of low information voters and lots of people that, don't understand what was at risk. 51% of Americans, despite everything that was thrown at him, said, I trust him more than I trust her.
Right.
That's a huge, and surprisingly, what are the numbers here? It's shocking to see almost 20 million fewer people voted this election than last election. So maybe just exhaustion from the constant fire hose of bullshit. People just, I can't deal with it. Maybe that's what happened. A risk of being a wealthy country is Australia voting is mandatory. If you don't vote,
compulsory voting. Yeah.
If you don't vote, you pay a fine. It's like a traffic ticket.
Let's go back to your piece.
Yep.
Sentiment is hard to measure.
Yes. Very hard to measure. And I study sentiment when it comes to...
What do you mean by sentiment? For someone's political sentiment, who they're...
No, just generally, if you want to get a sense of how people really feel about things, like there are a lot of different ways this happens. We in the market, we look at the Michigan Consumer Sentiment Survey, and it broke during the pandemic. I did a piece on this a couple of years ago, which I link at the bottom of this, which is partisanship driving consumer sentiment. So when you see what happens, and there's a chart here, I'll send you this chart. There's a chart from looking at where sentiment, it just collapses during the pandemic. And so when Biden comes in 2021, sentiment is really bad and stays bad. In fact, it stays bad throughout the whole presidency. It's worse than the 87 crash. It's worse than the 9/11 terrorist attacks. It's worse than the financial crisis. And it's worse than the pandemic. Stop and think about how bonkers that is. And even today, September 2024, it's still worse than some really bad, all of 2000. We're still far below where we were in the dot-com crash and 9/11. And all right, we're now above where we were during the financial crisis, but just barely. It's really shocking. So here we are, trying to figure out why sentiment is so bad. I just don't think you can reach people in the same way you used to get a fair survey. And I also think people are just trolling people, trolling
surveyors,
pollsters and surveyors. Right. And there's just so much silly shit going on that
makes it hard to measure in any accurate way.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not detached irony of the millennial generation. It's a next level. It's like burn it all down, and I'm going to just make shit up if someone calls me because my situation isn't good and I want to burn it all down. That attitude that we don't trust institutions. There's a reason propaganda. The purpose of propaganda isn't to convince you of things that are false. It's to undercut your faith that there even is a fact to find out and that institutions are viable. And in fact, the military may be the last institution that has any sort of widespread approval. The media is not well approved. Congress has always been in the shitter. This Supreme Court used to be one of the highest ones.
The CDC?
Stop and think about it.
College?
Look, I don't know how else to say this, but vaccines are a miracle. Like hundreds of millions of lives, that's not an exaggeration, mostly children's lives, but hundreds of millions of lives have been saved. And when I got into an argument with somebody, here's where you shouldn't teach a pig to sing, who was complaining that the hospital her husband, the doctor, worked at was mandating that the nurses, this is 2 years ago, that the nurses get vaccinated for COVID and everything else. And I'm like, listen, you're talking to the wrong person. If you're a healthcare professional and you don't understand the value of vaccines, then you're in the wrong profession. Go get another fucking job. But you can't be a nurse in my hospital if you're not vaccinated. not just because it means that you're clearly clueless medically, but I, as the hospital owner, cannot take the risk that you're going to infect other patients. When it traces back to you, we don't want that liability.
Right.
And I had employees in my firm who didn't want to be vaccinated, and the response was, we're not mandating that you're vaccinated, but from a liability perspective, I can't allow you in the office. So you have to work remote, and that probably isn't great for your long-term career prospects here. But we're not going to fire you. We're just going to think that you're not very smart. And by the way, if you didn't want to be the first 1,000 or million or even billion people to get a COVID vaccine, you have some sort of an argument. There have been 15 billion COVID vaccinations and boosters given. We know how it works now. It's 4 years later. How are you not vaccinated? There's a family member that was disinvited to Thanksgiving because he's not vaccinated. Hey, we have some young people here. We have some babies. We have some old people here. You cannot put their health at risk because you listen to Joe Rogan. That's just, sorry, you can't come. Go get vaccinated, and I don't want to see a fake card. I need to see proof from CVS that you were vaccinated. Otherwise, there are babies here and elderly people with diseases. You can't come.
Yeah, institutions and the lack of faith in them.
Propaganda absolutely does that. Absolutely.
All right, listen, I got to wrap it up. I know you got to go, and I want everybody to go read that article, and we only touched on a few of those things. I appreciate this conversation as always. I want to obviously keep in close touch. And what do you think people should be reading, looking at, doing right now?
So it depends on where they are and what they do. If you're a professional person in the Democratic Party, I think you need to really rethink your entire approach to elections, and you have to find a way to combat the rampant disinformation.
Yeah, but that's a media thing
there.
too. That's a media strategy too. But
listen, by and large, the media, sometimes it's misfocused. They emphasize the horse race. They emphasize the narrative. But outside of the real Fox News and ONN and the whole right-wing blogosphere and that stuff, the traditional media, I don't love its priorities and its focus, but they're not out, pushing misinformation. There is a very purposeful attempt to keep Americans misinformed about what's really going on. And it's proven itself to be very effective. Let me end on the Roger Ailes, the founder of Fox News. The original concept behind Fox News is if we had our own media outlet, said Roger Ailes, then Nixon wouldn't have to resign. We would be able to drive the narrative. We would create the first draft of history. We would inform people what we wanted to inform them about. And our president wouldn't have to have stepped down. And there's just no way in my mind that Trump wins either 16 or 24 without Fox News. It's a giant factor. All right, the wealthiest guy in the world spread a lot of misinformation through Facebook, and wasn't much better. Certainly 2016 Facebook was terrible. So I think the entire ecosystem, right-wing ecosystem, has proven itself to be really effective, and the opposing side.
All right,
my perspective of this is it's too costly in my field to believe bullshit. So I really make an effort to
debunk bullshit. Yeah, that's why I love
information hygiene.
Having you on. Is there anything else? That was advice for Democrats, and I think media and journalists to keep doing a lot of what a lot of good journalists do. Hopefully, they're allowed to, but. Is there anything else that you would suggest to read or do or for people to think about that is either good advice for life or investment?
My best advice for people is to take a long walk in the woods and clear their head, and then come back ready to deal with a country that a small percentage of people are going to try and pivot in a direction that is probably against the will of the vast majority of people, despite their votes. I'm not taking the 51% as a mandate for all of Trump's worst impulses. I think it's the economy, stupid. I think the elites read too much into things. Biden didn't have a mandate. Kamala wouldn't have had a mandate. I don't think Trump had a mandate. And I think that if he causes problems, a recession, I think his vice president will wear the same albatross around his neck in 28 that Harris wore in 24. By the way, I'll tell you the thing that I've been saying for the past few years to no avail is the Biden administration, similar to the Obama administration, is guilty of political malpractice. They had a fantastic economy. They inherited a situation that led to inflation. They handled it as well as one could hope. They passed a lot of legislation, and they failed to rub that into everybody's faces. I remember the Trump administration screaming about how good the economy was, even in the midst of the shitstorm during the pandemic. And one side touts its accomplishments, whether they should or not, and the other side fails to tout it. It's not just misinformation. You got to go back to there's a void that the misinformation filled. And Clinton, for all of his personal peccadillos and problems, did a great job touting his economy. We don't see that from Biden. We didn't really even see that from Obama. And the nicest thing about Biden is I didn't have to wake up each morning and see what the president was shitposting on Twitter at 3 a.m. Yeah. It was like, I want to hear from the president infrequently, but probably more frequently than Biden. Biden blew an opportunity to tout his accomplishments. And on the one hand, Harris was painted with the problems of his administration, but got none of the credit for the positives of his administration. That's a messaging issue, not a message issue.
I appreciate you joining me so much, man. I'm going to faint if I don't eat soon. I love you. Let's talk soon. I'm fading.
All right, man. Talk to you soon.
All right, there he goes, Ritholtz. I hope you appreciated that conversation. I'm sure he didn't agree with it. He's always annoys you or pisses you off somehow, but most of what he said, if you can cut through that and get around it, I think is pretty valuable stuff. He's not right about everything, I think. Obviously, I tried to point to the parts where I disagree with him, but I always love talking to him and talking about the behavioral analysis that he's such an expert on. So now it's time to get to my appearance on Brian Shapiro's show. Brian Shapiro hosts a radio show, an internet show at the same time, and a podcast, which is really what after joining this guy on his show yesterday, by the way, I had a great conversation with him about how I could be doing basically something very similar and getting back into kind of a live radio show. So it's pretty exciting what he was talking to me and offering me. So, hey, we'll see, because I'm going to keep networking with the guy. But you can find his show, Pushing the Limits with Brian Shapiro, Pushing PTL Radio on Twitter, and pushingthelimit.live. And go subscribe to his YouTube channel where he's making it happen at PTL Radio Show, Pushing the Limits. That's all. All right, so Brian, like a lot of other people, apparently saw me on CNN the other night and didn't threaten me or my family. He's a great guy, and here is my conversation with him.
So maybe we'll take a little bit more calls, a few more calls later on in the program. So I'm watching CNN last week, and as I've said on this show multiple times, I think Scott Jennings, the Republican CNN contributor, is an absolute clown and a douchebag. I've said that time and time again. He's very condescending. He has no moral compass. All he cares about is tax cuts for the rich, but he doesn't seem to care about the fact that Donald Trump calls the enemy within, a liable sexual abuser, a 34-count felon, so on and so forth. I've talked about Scott Jennings on this show before. By the way, he has responded back to me on Twitter, and he's refused to come on this show. Shocker. So I'm watching CNN last week, and they had a guy on who you might have heard of him before. His name is Pete Dominick. He's a very talented and funny comedian. He's been a contributor on MSNBC. He's on CNN. He's worked with Jon Stewart. He's worked with the Colbert Report. And I want to play for you this exchange that he had with Scott Jennings, because it proves everything that I've said about Scott Jennings. Just have a listen to this.
Signal that Afghanistan. The wars in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, the Republican policies that led to those wars, the idea that Joe Biden made the final difficult decision, and his administration and his military leaders. I mean, you guys live on the tippy top of bullshit mountain if you actually think that so many people think that the pullout of Afghanistan was the pivot point. Are you kidding me?
Well, I mean, I can read a chart and I can read a poll. I guess you can't. But the reality is when he made that decision.
Your petty insults
when he made
are
that
so weak, dude. You have no idea. Like, I don't even understand if you hear yourself talking. Look, you can laugh all you want, but like, I can't read a chart. Like, it's so hacky. It's so uninteresting.
Look, the reason that we brought this up is because that's what's from a Democratic.
Yeah, he's right. It is so condescending. That guy is joining on the show right now. Very happy to have Pete Dominic, and I was happy also to see that he's a fan of this show, which means a lot to me. Pete, I do appreciate you coming on, my friend. How are you?
Dude, I discovered you 6 months ago, and then you know how things work, like algorithms. Like once I clicked on you twice, they just fed me you every day. And I just love it because I'm like, oh, there's that Brian Shapiro. He's going to eat somebody alive. But more importantly, just not only is it entertaining, but just like your righteousness, your knowledge of the issues, your style debunks this idea that, liberals are snowflakes and all that. And you're just really smart in the way that you run your show. I loved it. And I got a little jealous. I missed talking to the live callers because I hosted at SiriusXM for, 12 years. And I thought live radio is the best. So I'm a huge fan of yours. I'm really happy you invited me on, and I'm psyched to be here, man. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Pete. That really means a lot to hear somebody like you say that. You've been doing this for a long time. I really appreciate that. Let's start with Scott Jennings, and then I want to talk to you a little bit about, some of Donald Trump's hires over the past week. What is that like when you're sitting across from a guy like Scott Jennings live on CNN, millions of people watching, and he's so condescending to you? Like, what is going through your mind at that point?
Well, I'm an emotionally disturbed person, so it affects me. It triggers me. And like in therapy, I've worked on that moment between stimulus and response. But believe it or not, Brian, I've gotten nowhere near being good at handling that moment. So my reactions to, that kind of ridiculous. I'm a stand-up comedian. Or I certainly spent most of the first part of my career in comedy clubs with hecklers and other comedians. And I grew up around a lot of black guys. So like, I know how to heckle. I know how to, snap on people and all of that. I get the game, but I just, to be sitting next to such a hollow barrel and having him try to condescend to me was too much. I actually don't think I sounded very good. I wish I would have handled it differently, but I also needed to let him know that that's how I felt in that moment. But more importantly than any of that, the thing that you said, I disagree with. You said about Scott Jennings might believe this or that about, I think you said some economic issue, trade or something. But the truth is, but I'm like, there's a lot of guys, and we can talk about media, and I know more about that. It's the only place I'm an expert than anything else. Like Scott Jennings has no beliefs. His whole deal is to play that seat, that role on CNN and get paid. I mean, he hates Donald Trump. All those guys.
I agree. No, let me be clear, because maybe I wasn't. Pete, I agree with you 100%. I think many of these people, most of them are phonies. They bend into pretzels for Donald Trump. They know he's an awful human being. And you're absolutely right. Jennings lies on the air every single day. That's what they pay him to do. So, I agree with you.
I also think that a lot of the men that kind of apologize and side with Donald Trump, and I'm certainly not casting any aspersions on Scott Jennings. I know nothing of anyone ever accusing him of anything. And I'm not saying this, but I think that when you can relate to or apologize to a man who has sexually assaulted dozens of women, sometimes I wonder if you're comfortable with that because you are that. And so I think that's I think people miss that a lot. Like if you really believe that guy isn't a serial sexually assaulting person, then I think maybe you don't know what sexual assault is, and maybe you yourself have sexually assaulted a lot of women, and maybe you feel bad about it because you know it's wrong, but it makes you feel a little better because you've done it before.
I think that's a good point you make. If you don't mind me asking, like when you guys are off the air, when that segment ends, does he say anything to you? Do you say anything to him? Is there anything that's said between the two of you after that?
First of all, you can ask me anything you want, and I'll answer everything.
Thank you.
And second of all, no, he does. He looks at his phone. I look at him because I want to make sure. When I go into cable news television studios where I've worked for over 10 years and gone on those types of panels, I 100% go in, including the women at the table, whoever they are. I try to come in there as confident and as much of an alpha as I can. I try to be the alpha in the room because I know I'm not as smart as some of those people on certain issues. So I try to intimidate them with my own personality. So when those cameras come on, they know, not to come for me. And so you have to identify who the others are in that way, and you have to play that game. And so in my case, a guy like that looks down at his phone and doesn't look at you. He'll say something on the camera, but he's not consistent off, and I am.
Cowardly is the word that I would use. At a minimum, if he said, hey, man, nothing personal. I know we disagree on stuff, but I appreciate the conversation. And he shook your hand, and maybe you'd have a little bit of respect for him, maybe a little bit.
I went in and I said hi to him. We know each other. I said, hey, Scott. That was it. And then we don't say goodbye. And there's a lack of respect that I have for him. And I'm sure he probably feels nothing for me, but yeah.
Right. I'm trying to figure out where they find some of these people. I'm trying to remember the guy, he's getting into it with Mehdi Hassan. Yeah. And he makes a joke about a beeper. And I know they threw him out, which CNN, I'm not blaming CNN for that. I'm blaming that douchebag for making that statement. But I'm like, where are we at as a country? Imagine the types of comments that they make behind closed doors when they're not on the air. Right. I say the same thing about Donald Trump, right? The stuff he says at a press conference, at a rally, the enemy within, attacking Gold Star families, attacking women on looks. Imagine the stuff that Donald Trump says behind closed doors.
Oh, I don't have to. I mean, we've heard him on tape, right? You can grab women. And I also was on The Apprentice in 2004. And when I was on The Apprentice in 2004, I was doing, the whole thing was they had to hire comedians to host a benefit. That was the whole task. And they said to us in 2004, Mr. Trump, this is off air, Mr. Trump is going to be here soon. Would you like to meet him? And I said, does he want to meet us? And they said, not necessarily, but we can arrange a meeting. And I said, then I don't want to meet him because I knew that he was an awful person, just particularly to women. I knew that for a fact because I knew women who knew him, and I was a New Yorker. And if you're a New Yorker, you read the tabloids. So I was using, I wanted to be on that show. I didn't consider I was using Trump. He wasn't that show. That was an NBC property. They picked him, and he took full advantage of it, obviously. But the point I'm making is I didn't want to meet him then. He was terrible then, and those people. So where do they find these people? Was your question? These people are a dime a dozen. And so the harder thing to find is a female or a black person who will support Trump. And once you find one of them, those people are making money.
If I'm having a conversation with Scott Jennings, which I never have, and I'm sitting across the table where you were, I probably would have handled it the same way you did. But I would say, look, dude, we can talk about policy. We can talk about the accomplishments of the Biden administration. But does a moral compass matter? Does decency matter? Don't you want that in a leader? Right. Or do you want somebody that just attacks? And by the way, the comment that you made about suckers and losers, you're absolutely right on that. We're led to believe by a Scott Jennings or these MAGA Republicans that a 5-star general who's risked his life for this country in public service is just blatantly lying about something like that. These are the people that knew Donald Trump best. These are the people that work for him. It seems like the people that say the nice things about Donald Trump, either they're in it for themselves, like a Marco Rubio, or they've said disparaging things about Trump before, like his vice president, the next American Adolf Hitler. Are these people just complicit? Are they just liars? Or do they believe the stuff that they spew?
Oh, they mostly don't believe it. I mean, Joe Rogan, I don't think believes what he's saying. Joe and I used to be friends. I was on his show, and I know that he doesn't believe a lot of the stuff that he says. I mean, I think
why is he supporting Trump?
Why?
Yeah,
because it helps him. Helps him. I think. I mean, he's got most of his audience is men, and MMA and all that. Anything that appears quote tough or traditionally masculine and so on. Also, it's just he's can be a contrarian. I mean, I could go on and on about him specifically, but the question
think Elon Musk paid him off or no?
No. Joe, first of all, has a $100 million deal with Spotify, and I'm sure he doesn't trust Elon Musk to fulfill his end of the deal or whatever. Joe is using Elon, I'm sure. More importantly, Elon is using Joe. Joe doesn't need Elon. Elon needs Joe.
But let me ask you this then, because I wasn't aware that you did the Rogan show, but I want to ask you about Kamala Harris because
in 2019, before COVID, I did it.
Gotcha. Okay. I thought that Kamala should have done the Joe Rogan show, not because I love Joe Rogan, because I don't, but I think that they were a little bit too, what's the word I'm looking for? Conservative, for lack of a better term, with letting her do interviews until later on. She did Bret Baier, which I thought was great. She did Howard Stern, which I thought was great. I thought she should have done more. And I know she was put behind the 8 ball. 3.5 months is not enough time, in my personal opinion, but I thought she should have done Joe Rogan. What's your thoughts on that?
The reason I disagree is only because of the fact that those shows end up being clipped up. So if there would be an inevitable moment in a 2 to 3 hour conversation, which is what he likes to do, where she was going to say something that would have maybe gone viral, and that would have been the thing that most people would have heard. The people that heard the whole show in the context would have seen how brilliant she is, and it would have been an advantage because she's so much smarter than the guy like Joe Rogan, and she would have come off as intelligent and thoughtful. And it would have probably debunked some of the things that are being said about her and so on. But in the end, it would have been the clips that would have probably hurt her, I'm guessing. So I always think of things as clips. You know, it's interesting that clip you played of me on CNN earlier got seen by millions more people than watched CNN when I was on. So it's always about the clips, whether it's a debate or a show. So I think of things in terms of what's going to be posted on social media and how it's going to reverberate. So I worried about that, but you may be right. It may not have been the case. Maybe she's brilliant throughout, and maybe but I don't think it makes enough of a difference. I don't think that Joe Rogan has such a huge audience that those turned into votes for Donald Trump that weren't already, you know. I'm not discounting what you're saying. You might very well be right. I just think if you're running for president and I agree with what you said about Harris. I think she's a brilliant woman, very accomplished. We're on the same side there. I just think you got to take the hits and you got to listen. If they're going to cut something up and edit it a certain way, and then if they do that, then the campaign needs to put up the actual clip in the context of it. But I think it might have helped her, maybe not. So let me ask you this question then, and I'll start. I mean, would it have helped her? Let me say I can see that it would have helped her. Would she have won in any state or anything else?
I don't know. Probably not. Probably not. It might have helped her, but I hear where you're going with that. So I try to ask myself the same question, which is, well, why did she lose? I think there are multiple reasons, but I think the number one reason is misogyny. And people can disagree with me until the cows come home. Hillary lost, even though she won the popular vote. Kamala lost, Joe Biden won. I think there's a lot of people in this country that were willing to put aside the liable rapist, the 34 count felon, all the despicable things he said about women, the way he's treated women his whole life, the laundry list, the things he said about John McCain and so on. But they were willing to put that all aside. When I say they, I mean his base of supporters. Yeah. They were willing to put that aside and say, I don't want a woman running the country. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, my short answer is I agree, but I think there's a much more interesting, longer answer, which is if I were to argue from a conservative point of view, conservatives have elected women governors in several states like Mississippi, Kay Ivey, and in other states, Nikki Haley in South Carolina, what's her name in North Dakota right now, who apparently is going to be in the cabinet.
The puppy killer.
Yeah, that lady.
Yeah, you're talking about Kristi Noem. Yeah,
I think it's important that people understand that women can uphold patriarchy and that black people can uphold white supremacy, like the lieutenant governor of North Carolina or unfortunately lots of others. And so I absolutely think that was a factor, a huge factor that people did not want to vote for a woman because she's a woman. But as I've been thinking about this and talking about this with people who I vehemently disagree with, I'm changing my opinion just slightly about sexism and racism to define it in a way, because a lot of people are getting so offended that when you or me say you didn't vote for her because she's black or because she's a woman, they're saying that never came into my mind. And here's the thing, Brian, I believe them. I believe that they aren't thinking about black folks or undocumented immigrants necessarily. A lot of them are, obviously. Or women. A lot of them are, obviously. But I believe some of the people who say that. The problem for me as an anti-racist and anti-sexist, and don't get me wrong, I'm plenty racist and plenty sexist. I'm just saying I'm trying not to be. The problem is, and the way not to be is to surround yourself with smart people of color and women, and especially women of color, which I've done. But the different take I have is it's not that you won't vote for women or that you won't vote for a black person. It's that you don't care about them. You don't think about them at all. That is another definition of sexism. Like, I don't care I don't care about women's reproductive rights. I'm not a woman, or I don't have daughters, or I'm not worried about abortion. It doesn't affect me. That is another form of implicit, in this case, sexism
such a good point. Yeah.
Or racism. Like, I don't care about black people. So black people are so, I mean, Eddie Glaude was so, poignant the other day. He always is. I think what I said on CNN in this other clip about it is, I think that it has a lot to do with racism. It's that racism that is, I don't care about you. I don't care that you feel in danger, that you don't feel like you have access to healthcare, education, and opportunity in general. I don't care that you feel that way. I don't care. I'm not thinking about you. And to me, that's bad. We should care about other people. And every religious philosophy teaches that. And every single good person thinks that, care about the stranger. And we certainly should care about women, whether or not we have daughters. I have 2 daughters. And so some people say, sometimes my feminist friends, and I consider myself that, oh, you can't say you only care about women because you have daughters. And I would say, listen, fair enough. But because I have daughters, I think even more about them. Just the way I don't care about cystic fibrosis because I don't know anybody who has cystic fibrosis, so I don't think about it. But if I did, I would care a whole hell of a lot about it.
It's a natural reaction. And you make such a good point. When people go into the voter booth, they're not thinking about minorities. They're not thinking about a woman's control over her own body. You're absolutely right. And I think that's really important. If you're just joining us, comedian Pete Dominick, watch him on CNN and watched him for years. And he did a great show for a number of years on satellite radio. So I wanted to ask you, Pete, now
and
about
most importantly, listen to for God's sakes, plug my daily podcast, Brian.
Let's go. Tell me about your daily podcast.
I host a daily podcast, and the most interesting thing, and I'm sure you're experiencing this too, is something happened that I didn't plan for, and now it's more valuable than it would have been had Kamala Harris won to a certain extent. We created a community. And everybody's talking about the importance of community, and obviously humans have been talking about it for forever. It's important for every part that animates all parts of our life. So I built this community through the podcast, and I'd love to have listeners of yours come check it out. So lately, I do it every day. It drops at midnight, almost every night at midnight. I do a news segment, and then I interview experts, people who are experts on issues, and a broad range of experts, many of which you now are big stars on TV, like Laura Coates started on my show, and so many others. So I'm really proud of that. I'm a guy who says I don't know a lot. I bring on people who do. That's my show. And accidentally we created a community, and people, we hang out on Hangouts. We get together in real life. I'm friends with these people. If you need friends, if you're alone, if you're an extrovert, and if you're scared out of your mind right now, we got a place for you at standupwithpete.com.
I love it. If you ever need an expert that's a PhD in attacking MAGA deplorables, let me know.
I'd love to interview you. I want to get you on the show next week.
I would love to do it. Let's do it, my man. So I hate to be a downer here, but let's talk a little bit about some of the hires that Donald Trump has put in place here just over the course of the last several days. We have a few more minutes left here. Tom Homan, a guy who wants to separate families and deport 20 million people.
Yeah.
And then when asked, is there a way to switch it up where you don't have to separate families? He says, well, yeah, they can just leave with them. You mentioned Kristi Noem, Marco Rubio. You look at Mike Huckabee. By the way, Pete, Mike Huckabee just said recently in regards to this upcoming election, if Donald Trump loses, quote, it's going to be the last American election that will be decided by ballots rather than bullets. Mike Huckabee is the U.S. ambassador to Israel. Boy, talk about a guy that wants to bring peace into the Middle East, who thinks if Donald Trump lost, in the future, we're going to be talking about elections with bullets. I mean, what do you make?
This is breaking news to me. He appointed Huckabee?
Yes, he did.
To be...
Mike Huckabee, or as I call him, Mike Suckabee, is the U.S. Embassy, official U.S. Embassy cabinet member in Trump's to Israel. So Mike Huckabee.
The jokes are going to be all about, this is how the rapture happens. Like, it's Huckabee brings on the rapture. Because, of course, Christian nationalists or evangelicals, they support Israel because of their end times prophecy coincides with, or has common interest in that part of the planet, Israel, of course. And so seeing that Mike Huckabee has been appointed to bring on the rapture, I would think. And I was on his show all the time. He was on my show a bunch of times. I know him really well in person. Nicest, funniest guy. He's changed, though. His demeanor has changed to be much more cruel in the past, in the Trump years. The bottom line about all those people, most of those people, all of them, is the cruelty is the point, is the policy. So the meaner you can be, the more likely you will be to be appointed. And so in Tom Homan's case, the cruelty that will play out with the removal of undocumented people, you got to have a guy like him doing that. You got to be, even John Kelly, when he was his former chief of staff, was the head of Department of Homeland Security. Like, he didn't take pride in it. He didn't talk about separating families. Kirstjen Nielsen didn't love doing it either. This guy's going to enjoy it. So appointing people that are really terrible, mean, awful, people that enjoy, unfortunately, there's a certain segment of our population. I often talk about this being the difference between liberals and conservatives to a certain extent. Like, I don't enjoy people suffering, even if I hate them. If I hate you, I don't want you to suffer. But these people, after I was on CNN on Thursday night, I was in the police station on Friday night, Brian, because I got so many threats to my family, threatening to rape my daughters. They want me to suffer. They actively, and this has been my whole career, they actively try to threaten me. They want me to suffer. They enjoy my suffering. I do not, even that guy who called in a rape threat to my daughter, I don't want him to suffer. I don't want to become him. I will never become that. This is who a lot of them are.
I just want to go back to what you just said. I'm so sorry that you and your family have had to go through that. That's horrible. So you're telling me after your appearance on CNN Thursday, you're telling me that you received threats, after
all of my appearances on CNN, after every television appearance, after a lot of my social media activity, after my appearance on Joe Rogan in 2019, the worst threats I ever got were as a result of my role in my local school board fight, where I am, as you can imagine, a ferocious, vehemently passionate attack dog against those who would, subject marginalized communities to pain and exclusion and worse. And so as a result of my work trying to get the, good board members elected versus these moms of liberty people, they targeted my family with an anonymous call to Child Protection Services saying that I was sexually abusing my own daughters, who were then 15 and 17. And police came to my house. And so I had to interview my daughters, and they immediately knew I was a well-known person, and they knew what it was, but they still had to do it, and it was horrible. And so this is who they are, and this is what they do. We don't do that as a practice, and we aren't okay with it if we find out people who are like-minded do. But that's another reason I hope people will, trust me and find me credible and listen to my work and join our community, because I would rather, this is who I am. People they're going to threaten us. This is what fascism is. I have been subject of fascism many times, because what they do is they threaten you in hopes that you will stop talking, and I will not stop talking. I fear for my family, and I really do. I worry about them.
But sorry, you should be. I mean, that's just. I hate to say this, Pete, but I've gone through some similar things that you're going through. I mean, the things that people say about me that are completely untrue on a regular basis. I've just, but when you get threats to your family, like your daughter, like something like that, obviously you have to take it seriously. I've had death threats in the past, and I've had to take that seriously and take it to court. So sadly, Pete, we have to keep doing what we're doing, though, right? We have to keep the fight.
Especially white men. Like, white men have to do this. And the reason why white men don't do it is because why would you? For what reason? And it makes you uncomfortable, and it puts you in harm's way. So just take the easier way, and don't put your family in danger, and don't put your job in danger. But we stand on the shoulders of civil rights leaders who did. Some were assassinated, and there were a lot of white people who were part of that. If we're the problem, then we have to be we have to be the solution as well. And so we have to be in spaces and places where we advocate and where we push back. The standard you walk past is the standard you accept. So if you let somebody do something, say something, be something, then you're part of the problem. And so I've just always wanted to be the change that I want to see in the world. And, they can threaten me all they want. I've been a small guy my whole life. I've been running my mouth my whole life. I've got my ass kicked a couple times as a result of it. Bring it.
I love that. I love that attitude. And are you originally from New York?
Central New York. I grew up in Syracuse.
That's why. I'm from Connecticut. I'm from the East Coast. I love New Yorkers. Because, the way you guys are, and I'm talking about New Yorkers in general, not the way Donald Trump is.
I lived in New York City. I came of age. I moved to New York City when I was 18 and came up as a stand-up comedian, and all throughout the early aughts. I was in New York City on 9/11. I lost friends that day. I smelled those buildings burning and the people burning in those, and then I went out and protested against the Iraq war because I didn't, and
you were right
George
about,
W. Bush.
Which you were 100% right about. And now, by the way, one of Dick Cheney's closest advisors, Mike Waltz, is also Donald Trump's next Secretary of Defense. That's a whole nother can of worms. But I want to close by saying this, and let me just reiterate. I'm so sorry that you and your family have had to go through that. It's absurd. You're obviously an extremely talented guy. You're opinionated, in my opinion, on the right side of history. And I love hearing you, and I love hearing your voice, and it's courageous to continue to do what you're doing, regardless of all the crazy lunatics out there. You're obviously doing something right. If people weren't doing that stuff to you and me, and I don't condone it, I wish it wasn't happening, but if people weren't doing that, then we would be doing something wrong. People want us quiet. And it's interesting because these same people talk about freedom of speech and censorship. Then when they see somebody like you or somebody like me, they want to shut us up.
Yeah, you embody something, which is why I'm kind of attracted to what you're doing, because it's similar. We have a similar style in terms of the fearlessness of it, and this idea that somehow because of our politics we're somehow weak. And so, can I read something and then you can let me go?
Sure.
I can't believe I'm such a hack to fall for a meme because I don't know who wrote this. But I love it. It really speaks to me, and I think it describes you. And I wonder if you feel the same. But it's short. I'm not a liberal snowflake. My feelings aren't fragile. My heart isn't bleeding. I'm a badass believer in human rights. My toughness is in my tenderness. My strength is in the service of others. There's nothing more fierce than formidable, unconditional love. There is not a thing more courageous than compassion. But if my belief in equity, empathy, goodness, and love indeed makes me, or people like me, snowflakes, then you should know winter is coming.
I love that. And I do think that describes me a lot. If people want to call me a snowflake like you for being compassionate and caring about other people and not wanting families to be separated and not wanting to tell women what to do with their bodies and not wanting someone to be the leader of the free world who attacks every single person that disagrees with him, then if they want to call us a snowflake, bring it on, man.
Well,
we got winter. Bring it on.
I want to work with guys like you now to redefine masculinity and strength in a different way, because the Navy SEAL that comes home after fighting the war and does not confront his demons is weaker than the Navy SEAL who does. It's very hard to confront the horror show that is the life of so many men that are taking their lives, turning to alcohol and addiction, and supporting men like Donald Trump. We need to do better for those men and boys, and I'd be really happy to partner with you on that if you think that's something you'd be.
I would love to work with you down the road, and let's talk about that. But you're a really talented guy. I love what you do. Look forward to doing your show. Love to have you back, and let's talk in the future. And I wish you the safety and security for you and your family, my friend, and keep up the great work. And you got to get out here to Vegas.
Don't worry. I will. As much as I hate it, I will. But don't.
We'll talk about that. You're not the first person to tell me that. I had Michael Rappaport on once, and he hates Vegas.
Well, I mean, my only point about Vegas is, how do I say this? It shouldn't exist.
We can talk about that. That's another conversation for another show. Pete Dominick, love what you do, my friend. Appreciate the time and look forward to talking to you soon.
I'm really grateful and flattered that you had me on. Thank you very much, Brian. Keep up the good work.
Appreciate your time, Pete. Thank you so much. That's Pete Dominick, everybody.
All right, and there I went. Go check him out. Brian Shapiro, Pushing the Limits on YouTube and everywhere else. His clips go viral. I should have mentioned that before, because he's constantly arguing with Trump callers. It's pretty great. And I love him. Very cool. Very cool. And we had a great conversation after, and I'll get him on this show next week. So that's all I've got for you today. I've got Barry Ritholtz, got Brian Shapiro, my appearance on his show, and of course your warm blanket, the good feelings at the top, and I'll try to keep doing that. I think it's going good, but I definitely want your feedback. Let me know if you're missing the news clips and the headlines that I normally have been doing. It's definitely a change of format this week, post-election, as I look away from the day-to-day news, which is not helping me as much as what I have been doing here, and looking for the light and the joy. And thank you for those of you who told me to do just that, because it's working, and I'm not looking away. That's no doubt about it. We'll be in the fight together, and I will talk to you right here tomorrow on Stand Up. John Carroll, leading us, as always, writes and performs all of the music. Go support him. Pay him at johncarroll.org right now.
Open up the window to let in some light. You gotta stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You gotta stare the devil straight in the over your foot, down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw the land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom never go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.